Welcome back to the ShapeDiver tutorial series. Today I'd like to dig a bit deeper in the ShapeDiver plugin and start looking at the inputs and outputs that you can define using the plugin. And in particular, I'd like to start with the ShapeDiver text input. So if you remember from the first tutorial, I mentioned the supported inputs from the standard Grasshopper components that will be converted as inputs in the online ShapeDiver models. And you might have noticed that I did not mention the text panel. So the reason for this is that the text panel is a very versatile component. As you know, you can use it to define text and use it in a definition, but it can also be used as a component to output data from any other component on the canvas. So for this reason, since it's more of a multi-purpose component, we decided to not support it as a text input in ShapeDiver, and also for a second reason, which is that in a lot of cases the users need to define a maximum length for the allowed strings in the component, and that's not possible in the text input in the text panel. So instead of directly supporting this component, we decided to create our own text input component, which looks like this and is a component that will be converted into a text input for the users online once the model is uploaded. So the way it works is that you can double click on the component and define two properties. The first one is a default text that will be used before the user online enters any text. And the second parameter is the maximum allowed length for the input. So let's say I'm gonna write something, hello world, and define that the maximum length for this string is 15 characters. And now the component will output so in this case, the default string, and I can use it in my definition. So let's say I can also show you that we support text tags. So I'm going to output this just as a text tag in the model. So, and we support both 2D and 3D text tags. Here we go. So here I can use the string as the text for the tags. And let's say I have a model where I can pick between one or the other. So I'm gonna place it as the origin and use a filter with a toggle to switch between the 2D and the 3D text tag. Okay. Alright, so if the toggle is false, I'm going to use the 2D tag, and if it's true, I'm going to use the 3D one. Now I'm just going to add color to the tags, make sure we see them properly, and I'll add just a plain reference. Alright, so I can upload the file. And here is the uploaded model. I'm going to use a dark background because the floor is white. It's the plane. So here we can see, as expected, the 2D text tag and 3D text tag. They work exactly like in Rhino. But most importantly, we see the text input we defined with the default text defined in Grasshopper, but I can replace it here and upload the definition like this. Something I didn't mention earlier is the name of the parameters here. So every slider, toggle, All these inputs can pull their names from the Grasshopper names, and in the case of the text input, since it's a component, the name of the component is used. So I didn't rename it in this case, but I could just define another name and it would be used in the online viewer. Now I'd like to spend a minute talking about the potential applications for the text input component. So creating text tags is nice, but there's much more you can do with this. And this topic is broader than ShapeDiver in itself, but it's interesting to look at some use cases in the context of ShapeDiver. So the first type of applications is personalization. So think of anything related to engraving or embossing, jewelry and houseware items, for example. So in this case, what we need is to convert a text entity into an actual piece of geometry that will inform the 3D object in the end. So there are several ways to do this. There are several plugins that offer this type of features. For example, Squid has a text curves component which can take a text and with some options, even choose a font, etc., and creates a set of curves from this text. So here, if I look, I have converted my input text into a set of curves, and then I can use them in the definition. Another plugin that offers similar, if not identical component is FabTools, which has this text contour component, but FabTools is only compatible with Rhino 5. So you might want to pick one or the other depending on which version of Rhino you're using. But both of these plugins are compatible with ShapeDiver. As an alternative, I'm going to link in the video to a script that we usually use for ourselves in our own projects. And it's pretty robust. It has more options regarding the fonts and the different font variations. So for example, italic and different weights, depending whether they're available or not in the font. And it outputs both curves and surfaces directly from the component. So it's a good way to manipulate text as geometry inside Grasshopper. So again, I'm going to link to this script in the description of the video. One last point about fonts is that for this component to work, and also the ones I presented from the other plugins, they will work if the font is installed on the system, obviously. So you have to specify the fonts that you have installed. And on our servers, obviously, we can't have any existing fonts installed. We try to have a growing list of fonts with open licenses that you can use. And we have created this example model, the font browser, we call it, where you can search whether a font is installed or not on our system. And you can always go back to this model, and if a new font is installed, it's gonna be added to the search. Another important application of the text input component is the ability to exchange data with a web application. So if you embed your model online and you build a web application around it, typically the application will try to send and retrieve data in a standard data exchange format, which is the JSON format. So I won't go into too much detail about this today. We'll look at it in a different tutorial, but a simple example makes sense in the context of the text input component. So if we look at an example data that the application could send, it could look like this. A simple JSON object containing the description to build an array of boxes in the definition, giving the center and dimensions in all three axes. So typically the web application will send this as an unformatted string. So here I'm going to simulate the application sending this string through the text input component. And now I can retrieve the string in my Grasshopper definition. And of course, the string is not organized, so the question is how to parse and access the data from the string. And here, this is where I will go fast. We'll look again later, but we have a set of JSON tools in the plugin that allow to parse, so organize the data inside the string, and then access the relevant information we need. So here I'm gonna first access the boxes array, which is gonna directly output an array of box descriptions, which is contained in the string. And now I can again go deeper in the JSON object and access, for example, the centers of the boxes. And here, let me flatten the tree. Well, okay, not flatten yet. I'm gonna first convert each element into a point here. And yeah, now I have my two centers for my boxes. And I can do a similar process to get each dimension of the box. So for example, X, Y, and Z. This is not extremely clean, but this is for a fast demonstration. And here I don't need to convert, it's already numbers. So I have all of my information, and I can now create boxes using this information with the centers and the dimensions contained in the string. So using those JSON objects is really an efficient way to communicate with a web application and send large amounts of data without too much hassle. So that's it for today. We spent quite some time on just the text input component, but despite it being a simple component, it comes with a lot of nice features and nice applications in ShapeDiver, so it was worth it. Next time we'll finally start looking at the other types of inputs and outputs, and mainly it concerns file inputs and file exports. So thanks again for listening and making it to the end of the third tutorial, and see you for the next one.